Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Judith Arnold, and I'm an author who loves readers.
My pleasure today to introduce Judith Arnold, and I truly mean my pleasure. I've known Judith for, we're not going to say how many years, because we're younger than how many years we've known each other. Yes. We frequently room together at writers' conferences, and one of the saving graces for us is that she is a morning person and I'm a night person, so we never argue over the bathroom.
We are very compatible that way, yes.
We are. So we just get along fine. And Judith was an established, renowned author when I was just starting. She has so many wonderful books that you could spend the next year reading her terrific books. She writes romances, mysteries, fun, cozy mysteries, and women's fiction. And does that cover it, Judith?
I think pretty much. I have written some very bad poetry, but we won't go there.
She's also a playwright. She has educated as a playwright and has had plays produced. So to get to know her a little bit on a fun level, we're going to ask her some questions. I might have just taken one answer. So what's a surprising job you've held?
A surprising job I've held is a tax preparer for H&R Block.
I didn't know that.
I see, surprise. Yes,
Yes.
I did that because before I had sold my first book, my husband was so convinced I was going to make tons of money. He suggested I take an H&R Block course so I could learn how to do our taxes when I was making all this money. And I took the course and I did so well in it that they offered me a job, and I, being very superstitious, felt if I don't accept this job, I will never sell a book. So I took the job, and it was from January to April, obviously heavy tax season, and I sold the book the first week in February, sold my very first book, but then I was stuck working at H&R Block until April 15th because they could not let me go before then, and that was my most bizarre job.
That's terrific. And what a great background for an author. What's a saying of your mother or father that you hear yourself saying now?
Oh, this is really kind of embarrassing, but can't a person get some peace and quiet around here? and my mother used to say this to me when I was a child, and I was so wounded, and I would think, I will never, ever say this, ever. But of course I say it all the time. A little less now that my kids are grown and out of the house, although I do have to say it to my husband sometimes. But yeah, that's the one. I hear it coming out of my mouth and think, oh no, I've turned into my mother.
Yeah. Okay, you're right-handed, correct?
Yes, I am.
Which is longer on your right hand, your index finger or your ring finger?
They are identical in length. I don't know what that means.
Are they really? I don't know what it means either, but that's weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, as long as they work on the keyboard, I don't care.
Good point. What's your favorite color and why?
I think my favorite color is turquoise. It makes me happy when I see it. It makes me happy when I wear it. Right now, you can't see this, but I have a turquoise scarf around my neck, a silk scarf that my husband gave me as a gift, and I love turquoise. It's just a happy, happy color for me.
I love that color too. So, do you have a childhood book that addicted you to stories?
I have a few. There one group of books that I read as a child that I'm so excited about because now I'm writing mysteries too, were the Freddie the Pig books, which were a mystery series. And they were wonderful. And many years later, when I had my first agent, it turned out that he was the agent for Walter Brooks, who wrote the Freddie the Pig books.
So Freddie the Pig was the sleuth?
He was the sleuth. All the books take place on an upstate New York farm, and it's all anthropomorphic animals, and they're very funny and witty. And I read them to my children, and as an adult, and I discovered there was so much subtext in them that I was not aware of as a child. But they were absolutely brilliant and wonderful, and I would happily read them again right now. And the other book I would think of was Charlotte's Web, which blew me away as a child and blows me away as an adult too. E.B. White's classic. It is just such a wonderful, wonderful book. I love spiders because of that book.
Okay, you can kill all the spiders in, in any rooms
I
we
don't
share.
kill spiders. I let them live because I keep thinking they could be Charlotte, you know.
Okay, you could place them outside the
Okay,
room.
that's fine. Okay.
Well, let's move into the more substantive questions. Before you wanted to be a writer, what did you want to be? I'm thinking not a tax preparer.
No, I did not want to be a tax preparer. It was funny. I until I decided I was going to be a writer, I always assumed I would do other things but write because I always was writing. I wanted to be a lawyer because I thought I could be the first woman on the Supreme Court. Fortunately, we did not have to wait for me to do that. For a while, I wanted to be an astronaut till I found out how much science you have to know.
Oh, yeah, drawback.
And I wanted to be a rock star, of course. I was in some rock bands growing up and actually majored in music in college and wrote a lot of very kind of Joni Mitchell-like songs. So yeah, I was going to be a rock star too. But I was always writing, no matter what. And finally it occurred to me, wait, I don't have to be those other things. I could be a writer.
Do you think writers look at the world and people differently from non-writers?
I think so. I think writers, for one thing, we have to understand motivation. And maybe I'm speaking in broad generalizations here, but I think, when people do things, I'm always trying to figure out what their motivation is, why they feel this way, why they said that, why they did this. And so that's one way I think that we see the world differently. Another way, and maybe this is just me, but I have always processed my experiences in words. It's like when I'm observing something, I'm observing it, I hear it in my head in words. And I've known artists who see everything as visual. They process the world through their eyes, and I sort of process it very verbally. When I'm thinking through a problem, I think it through in paragraphs in my head, and then sometimes I even edit the paragraphs. And I just, when I'm lying in bed at night, if I'm having trouble thinking, falling asleep, I just, words are just always in my head. So it's kind of a way of interpreting the world for me. And I assume other writers probably experience something similar. We're so immersed in words. The words are the way we connect with the world.
When you start a story, where do you start? How does a story start for you?
Usually it starts with some characters taking up residence in my head and saying, here's our story, here's our situation. They don't actually, I wish they would tell me more of their story. Usually they tell me their situation. Here we are, here's our problem, you write it out and solve it for us. And sometimes I pay attention, and sometimes I will tell them, no, I'm not interested in your story, go away. And sometimes I've done that and they just won't leave me alone, so I finally give in because they just nag at me and nag at me. But I almost always will start with character, and usually, I after interviewing the characters for a bit in my head, I will have an understanding of what they want in life, kind of their goal, their motivation, and what's standing in their way, and then the story sort of blossoms from there.
What's your favorite part of the process? And what's your least favorite part?
Well, I would like to say my favorite part is typing the end. Ha ha, I'm done. I do like the revision process. I like to, in a way, sometimes, and this is going to sound like I'm an artist rather than a writer, but I think of it almost as a sculpture. And the first draft is a very rough hewn part, and then I like to go back and polish and smooth and tweak. And play with the words. I get more of a chance to play with the words in the revision process. So I really do enjoy that. And it depends on the book. Some books are just so brutal to write. They just don't want to come out. And in those cases, the writing itself is a real torture. But usually I like the conception part, the part before I start writing, when I'm interviewing the characters and getting to know them. and I love the revision, and the rest of it, well, I love having written, as a lot of people.
When you have a book that is brutal like that, do you find the reaction from the readers? Do you think that other people get that sense that it was brutal, or even for you in the rereading it or editing it, can you tell that it was brutal?
They come out pretty much the same as the ones that aren't brutal, which amazes me. I'm usually, when I have a brutal book and then I go back to do the revisions, I'm usually astonished to find out this doesn't suck. I thought it sucked while I was writing it, but it doesn't. I have one of my books, Cry Uncle. It was originally published by Harlequin, and now it's available in an updated digital edition. But I wrote it during a really awful time in my life. My sister was battling cancer, and she was not doing well, and this was a comedy. It was a funny book. And every day, I'd go to visit her at the hospital, and I'd come, because she was in this isolation thing. She was getting a special experimental treatment, and I'd come home, and I'd have to force myself to write this book because it had a deadline. And I finished it, and I mailed it to my agent and said, please read this overnight, because it was due. I was very close to the deadline. I said, I'll read it overnight and tell me if it's as bad as I think it is. And he read it and called me the next morning and said, it's fine, I'm sending it off to your editor. And the book was phenomenally successful. The editors loved it, readers loved it. It was very funny. I don't know how I got through that, but it took me years and years and years to be able to go back to that book, because all I could think of when I read it was this terrible time in my life and how torturous it was to write.
Yeah, the real life you associated with it.
Yeah, but it's very funny and came out fine. I sometimes I think the muse takes over, or some spirit inside you takes over when you don't think the writing is coming. Somebody else, some kind of supernatural spirit comes out and gets the writing done for you. But yeah, they come out fine. Even if they're horrible to write, they still seem to come out okay.
Maybe that book came to you then because you needed that respite.
It could be. It was a little bit of an escape. I could come back and say, I can control this world. I can't control what's going on in my life right now, but I can control these characters. Although, again, sometimes characters just don't want to be controlled. They go off their own way. They have their own minds. But it was kind of fun to kind of slip back into Key West and all the crazy, kooky people in Key West, and the Haitian voodoo lady and the bratty 5-year-old and all these other characters in there, and just lose myself with them for a while.
You brought up sometimes the characters don't cooperate. Do you find that your books change a lot from conception to publication?
Absolutely. I am a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I do not like to outline my books before I start writing, because the outline is part of the discovery, and once I've discovered the whole thing, who wants to go back and now write it? I already know what happened. So again, I usually start with the characters and their situation and their problems or whatever, their conflicts, and then I kind of see where they take me. And sometimes they take me down a blind alley and I have to yank them back. I usually have an overall idea. Obviously, if I'm writing a mystery, I know there's going to be a dead body in the beginning of the book and there's going to be a solution at the end, but sometimes I don't even know until 3/4 of the way through who the actual villain is, which I think probably comes through in the writing so that the readers are kept guessing also, because they may not realize it, but the author is kept guessing, who did it. But, I have that basic architecture. I know in a romance, I know there's going to be a couple and they're going to fall in love, they're going to have a lot of conflicts, they're going to have to overcome some major problems, and they're going to end up together. So I have that basic overall structure in place, but how they get there, who knows? Sometimes they surprise me. Often they surprise me, and usually the surprise is good. Sometimes the surprise is not so good, and we have to kind of backtrack and find a new route to where we're going.
Sometimes for me, when that happens, the answer is in research. Do you enjoy doing research?
It depends on the...
Dread it?
I will say that, when I first started publishing, there was no... Well, the internet may have existed, but it was not what it is. There was no Google, certainly. When I wanted to research something, I had to get on the phone. you probably know this from your background in journalism too. I had to get on the phone and call experts, or I had to go to the library. And now, of course, research is just so easy. You just, Google something. And of course, the downside of that is, like, I'll be writing a book in which the heroine, it's a romance, and she's going to wear some really sexy lingerie. So I research sexy lingerie, and then for the next 6 months, I'm getting ads for crotchless panties are showing up on my browser. But the research, it can be.
And we blame it all on research.
Of course, and of course with the murder mysteries, I am always a little worried. When I do try to use books more than the web for like when I'm researching poisons or weapons or something, because who knows, I don't want the FBI to show up at my door saying, why are you doing all this research on cyanide? I do have a few books for that. But yeah, the research can be fun. It can be dangerous because you just get so absorbed in it you forget that you're supposed to be writing a book. You just keep clicking along and saying, oh, but that looks interesting. Oh, let me check that too. So I do enjoy that though. And of course it's so convenient nowadays that you can just sit there and do it right at your desk.
So on your most recent release, what was the title of your most recent release?
It's called Kick the Bucket. It's the 4th book in my Lainie Lovett murder mystery series. It just was released on Halloween, October 31st.
What research did you do for Kick the Bucket?
Well, I did some hands-on research for that because it's set in an independent living senior residence, very similar to the one where my mother lives. So I'm a little worried about what she's going to say when she reads it, because I've told her several times, this is fiction. I'm waiting for the paperback edition to be released. Right now it's only available in digital, and my mother does not read digital, so she has to wait until the paperback version comes out. Having her live there and for the past 8 years, and I spend a lot of time there visiting her, and it was on-site research. I did have to do some research on poisons for that one, but my younger son gave me for Christmas last year a book about poisons. I requested it. It's Dear Santa, will you bring me a book on how to kill people? But
I think that's on the naughty list.
Yeah. So I did do some research in that. That must have been 2 years ago, because I researched a lot for my 3rd mystery, the one that came out before Kick the Bucket. But that's a handy one to have, a handy book for if you're writing mysteries, and it's probably a little safer than going online and looking up all these things. Although I do look up poisons online too. And I haven't been arrested yet, so I guess we're okay.
I look them all up online.
Okay, and you haven't been arrested yet either, right?
Not yet. And I figure if they come knocking at my door, that's good research.
Well, if we both get arrested, we can be roommates in jail. We do get along so well.
And you can dispose of the spiders.
That's right, yes. I will take care of all the little Charlottes.
When you finish a book, when you wrap it up, do you find that you miss the characters, think about the characters once you've finished that book?
Usually I do. In a couple of those torture books, I'm just so glad to be rid of these people. Go away, I'm done with you, that's it. But with most of them, yeah, I do. The characters want to hang out with me afterward. On some occasions, like with the mysteries, that's a series, so I always know that Lainie, the heroine, and her sidekick friends and her kids are going to be around, and her 2 occasional boyfriends, they will all be around in subsequent books. So it's never really goodbye. It's just sort of go take a vacation. I have to write some other books now, and I'll let you know when I'm ready for the next book. But yeah, the characters become so real to you when you're writing their stories. You're living their lives with them, and yeah, it's sometimes it's very hard to say goodbye.
Has that led to having additional books come from the first book?
Yes, yeah, well, certainly it has. I have 2 books which I'm hoping to update and reissue now that I've gotten the rights back to them. The Bloom family books, which were originally published by Mira, and the first book I just wrote, and everybody, including me, loved the characters so much. I wrote a sequel.
And what are those 2 titles?
The first one is called Love in Blooms, and the second one is called Blooming All Over.
And tell us a little bit about the stories.
Well, they're about a family in New York City that has owned and run a gourmet food emporium, kind of like Zabar's, if you know New York City delis. When I say deli, I think people think of a sandwich shop, but this is much grander than that, with imported cheeses and artisan breads and all kinds of gourmet stuff. The first book just kind of came out. It was fun to write. I did a lot of research there, and I'd go down to New York City. My parents were living in the city then, and they'd say, "Come on down and do research." And my father and I would go up to the deli that the Bloom's Deli is based on, and we'd come home with shopping bags full of all kinds of gourmet treats. And my mother would say, "Enough with the research. I'm gaining weight from this book." People did. It was fun to write, and the story came out great, and people wanted to know more about the Bloom's family. So the first book was about one of the Bloom's sisters, and the second one was about her younger sister. And I do have an outline, a very vague outline for a third book. Once I reissue the first two books, I plan to write the third book and just party with the Bloom family, because they're crazy, wonderful people.
Do you have any of the lead characters be guys?
In the romances, I write heterosexual romances, and the heroes and heroines are pretty evenly balanced. Sometimes the book is a little more hero-oriented, sometimes a little more heroine-oriented. And with the Bloom's family, of course, there were two sisters, but there were plenty of men in the family also. I don't really ever think about it. Should I write a book that's really, more about men or more about women? Again, in my romances, I tend to think they're pretty balanced.
What do you find the most difficult about creating a character of the opposite sex?
I don't find it that difficult, because I raised two sons, and watching, it was amazing. Watching boys grow up helped me to understand why men are the way they are so much. I mean, you see it from an early age. I'm a militant feminist and wanted to raise feminist boys, and I think I did. They both are very good cooks and very helpful and very respectful of women and view women as their equals. But there are certain things that are hardwired into men that originate when they they pop out of the womb with their little Y chromosomes, and watching them grow up really gave me a lot of insight into guys. Now, I have messed up some things, I know. Sport, this would break your heart, but I do remember I wrote one book in which the characters were discussing the Harvard-Yale football game, and the book is set in October. And my husband went ballistic. He said, "No, that game is always played on Thanksgiving. What is wrong with you?" But he's the only one who ever noticed that. I did not get a torrent of letters from readers saying, "Why did you have them discussing the game in October?" But so I might get some of those details wrong. But yeah, occasionally my husband, who's read a lot of my books, and he will say, real men wouldn't think that way when he's reading a romance. And I always say, yes, but these are fantasies. these are what women wish men would be like. So I don't find it that difficult. I think part of the job of a writer is to get into the heads of people we aren't. In the same way that is it difficult for me to get into the head of a 5-year-old, because I've written some books with young characters, or an elderly woman, or someone from another country or another ethnicity. I consider it part of my job to really immerse myself in those characters' heads and see things through their eyes.
When you talked about having difficult books, that were really hard to write, have you had any that you've had to give up on, or that you have given up on, or that you've set aside temporarily? Ideas that just would not gel for you?
I do. I have a whole file on my computer of started books that are going nowhere. If I was really ready to part ways with them, I would delete them all, but I don't, because I keep thinking, well, maybe someday, if I'm stuck for an idea, I'll go back and revisit this idea and see if I can make it work, or see if it speaks to me in a different way now than it did then. So I saved them all, but yeah, in the pre-computer days, I have a drawer full of rejected manuscripts or completed manuscripts that I read and buried and said, no one will ever see these. And yet somehow I have not thrown them in the fireplace, so I guess somebody may see them someday. I will be dead by then, so they can't embarrass me.
But have you had some that you have given up on, that you have thrown out?
I don't know. I'm kind of a pack rat. I don't know if I've thrown any out, but I'm sure I've given up on most of them. I mean, some of them date back 20, 30 years, and I haven't looked at them since. So, yeah. I do think that every book you write, or even every book you start and don't finish, it's a learning experience. I learned something about myself or something about my writing, so I don't consider them a waste of time, but I don't know that whenever I think, oh, I'll never have another idea, suddenly another idea pops into my head, so I'd rather pursue that idea than go back to some other idea that didn't work out 10 years ago.
Do you have a specific name for the computer folder that you put those files in?
No, they're all actually, it's my WIP folder, WIP, works in progress, and everything, whether it's a successful book or an unsuccessful, aborted project, they're all in that folder. Once a book is finished and on its way to publication, it gets pulled out of the WIP folder and gets its own folder then, because I'll have other material that I want to affiliate it with, like the blurbs and the reviews and whatever else I have for it. But until it's completed and on its way to publication, everything is in the WIP folder, including sometimes I look at the WIP folder and I see a title of a book and I'll think, really, what was that? I don't even remember it. And I suppose I could open that file and read it and say, oh, that was what that was, but I don't have the time right now, because there's always a new idea and I'm so busy focusing on that.
Of your books that have made it from the WIP folder to the published folder, do you have any that you would consider an overlooked gem, a book that even your loyalist readers might have missed?
I do. I have one book in particular. It's called The April Tree, and this was a book. Actually, you ask if I ever go back to failed projects. The first time I tried to write a version of this book, I was 12 years old. I came back and forth with it years and years, and I discarded for 10 years at a time. And there were all these ideas about this book that I really wanted to write at some point. And I finally, a few years ago, I thought my career had flatlined. I thought I was never going to sell another book. And I just said, well...
After how many books?
Oh, gosh, that was probably around 85 or 90 at that point, 85 maybe. But, I had left my publisher. I had no agent, and I just said, I can't stop writing. I mean, I have tried to stop writing, and I can't. So I said, but if I'm never going to sell another book again, maybe it's time to bring out The April Tree and really work on it. And the timing was right. The story flowed out of me. It was a very different telling than it was when I was, needless to say, when I was 12, or when I tried it again when I was in my 20s, or when I tried it when I was in my 30s. But I wrote it, and right after I wrote it, I wrote my first mystery. And I sent them both to the editor of a small mid-sized press. I had sold a book to the Bellbridge Books. And I said, I think you'll like the mystery because it's funny and it's, commercial. Would you do me a favor and read this book too and tell me if I should, bury it in the bottom of a drawer or what? And my editor started reading it first before she read the mystery. She called me up a couple of days later and she said, I've just finished the first chapter and I can't stop crying. And she ended up reading it and insisting on publishing it. And it's very different from my other books. It's more literary. It deals with some very heavy issues. It's about how three friends cope with the inexplicable death of their fourth friend. And it was inspired by...
And how old are they?
Well, in the beginning of the book, they're 15. At the end of the book, they're 20. It's in two parts. One is when they're in high school, and one is when they're in college. But when I was 12, my best friend died, and it made me question so much about life and what I understood and faith and all of those things. And these were questions, obviously, that have been rattling around in my head ever since. And so writing this book out allowed me to explore those feelings, and it's really, I think it's a beautiful book. It is such a special book to me. I hope more readers will find it someday. It's called The April Tree, and it was published by Bellbridge Books, and just a very special book.
And it's available both as a paperback and digital, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, it is.
That's a particular kind of read. Do you think that you have other books that would be an easier place or the best place for new to you readers to start with your works? Because you are now over 100 books published, are you not?
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So of those 100, do you have a couple you can tell us a reader who has never read Judith Arnold before?
Well, yeah, I would say if you are a mystery fan and like light, funny, clever mysteries, you should start with the first book in my Lainie Lovett series, Still Kicking. It's a fun book, but it's a good mystery, and Lainie Lovett is just a really cool middle-aged school teacher who plays soccer and ends up solving mysteries. If you're a romance fan, I would suggest you try my Magic Jukebox series. The first book of that series is called Changes. And since these are series, it's probably best to sort of read them in order. Changes is, the Magic Jukebox series is about they're all set in a kind of a seaside town north of Boston. I live in Massachusetts, and there's an old kind of working class tavern in the town where a lot of town people hang out, and in the tavern is an antique jukebox, and no one can figure out how it works. All they know is if you put a quarter in, you'll get 3 songs. You can't choose the songs. You have no idea what the songs are going to be, but they're going to be old songs, old enough to have been recorded on vinyl. And every now and then, the Magic Jukebox will play a song that somehow casts a spell over 2 people in the tavern, and they will ultimately fall in love. And that's the premise of the series, and Changes is the first book in the series. It's the song in that one is David Bowie's Changes, his song. Each of the books is named after the song that somehow connects the hero and heroine. And they're pretty short, they're fun, some of them are darker, some of them are lighter, but they're a lot of fun, and readers really seem to enjoy them.
I would also recommend the Daddy School books.
Yeah, they're great too. The Daddy School, they originated when I was still writing for Harlequin, and again, I've gotten the rights back to them and updated them and reissued them, but that's a series. The first book in that series is called Father Found, which when it came out originally, it received the Reviewer's Choice Award from RT Magazine for the best Harlequin super romance that year. And the premise of that is that men want to be good fathers, but sometimes they need some instruction. And so all of the books have a child in them, or a baby, or somebody struggling. And it's not always the hero's child either. And at least one of the books, it's the heroine's child, and the hero he's falling in love with the heroine, but he hates children. So he still has to learn how to deal with kids too. And they're a lot of fun. Again, some are a little lighter, some are darker. But the first book in that series is called Father Found. That's a fun series too.
Yeah, what do you read for fun?
Well, it depends on what I'm writing. If I'm working on mysteries, I try not to be reading mysteries. If I'm working on a romance, I try not to read a romance. I really do like what I guess falls under the kind of vague genre of women's fiction, which I think, it's a funny name. I always joke that if somebody took The Great Gatsby and put a pink cover on it and it was written by Zelda Fitzgerald, it would be considered women's fiction. But I think of women's fiction as books about relationships, books about they're character driven. They usually have strong, interesting heroines. So I love women's fiction. I'm pretty eclectic. Frequently I will just read a book that somebody's handed to me, or that my book club is reading, or I recently read a couple of manuscripts from friends of mine who wanted some input on them. It varies. Right now I'm reading a women's fiction book by a friend of mine, and enjoying it a lot.
Do you find that when you read manuscripts like that, where somebody's asking for input, is that a different reading experience for you from reading a finished book by somebody you don't know?
Yeah, it is definitely. For one thing, when I read a finished book, I know that my input is not going to make any difference. I I can't call them up and say, I think that you could build this plot thread a little stronger or whatever. There's no point. I don't read those books with a pen next to my hand. But yeah, when I'm reading critically for a friend, yes, I'm looking at very specific, and I'm not looking for problems, but I'm looking for whatever I can tell them that will help them strengthen the story. So sometimes if a story is flawless, well, bravo. But if a story has promise but needs some work, you don't just want to say this has promise and needs some work. You want to be able to kind of guide them, say, here was the question in my head when I read this section. Here was what I was wondering what the heroine really wanted in this moment, so that they have something that they can work on if they want. I don't take it personally if they read my critique and say this doesn't make any sense to me, and they can toss it. It's up to them. It's their book.
You're probably better at reading published books without that critical aspect to it than I am.
No, I know. Oh, it's hard. There have been times when I have bemoaned the fact that I am a writer because it has, in some ways, really diminished the joy of reading for me. Because, yeah, we read everything as writers, and we think, oh, I would have done it this way, or oh, she really blew that, or oh, he didn't develop this the way it should have been developed. Yeah, it makes you very, very critical. I used to liken it to a magician watching another magician's performance and thinking, oh, I know how that works. Oh, I know how he did that. So it does reduce the joy, and that's one reason that I sometimes enjoy reading books that are completely not what I write, and just because I can sort of separate myself from it more and not think, oh, he should have done it this way, she should have written it that way.
I like the magician because that sometimes it's not that we're thinking how I would do it or change this or do that. It's just seeing the man behind the curtain. So you know what's happening and you know what's going to happen well before you should in the rhythm of the story. And it makes it hard to be as immersed in the story.
Right.
A lot of times I go back and reread things that I first read before I became a writer because I can still access that reader feel.
Oh, that's wonderful.
With those.
Because sometimes when I do that, I go back to them and I think, oh, why was I so transported by this back when I was 20, So it can go either way, but to have that fresh eye and that almost naivete when you read that book, it's like, oh, wow, this is a whole new world now. I can jump into it.
Yes. And speaking of reading and readers, we had some questions from readers. One may not apply as much to what you're doing now as an independent author, but she asks, when the cover image doesn't match the character description, and the reader says, a pet peeve of mine, how does that feel?
Oh, it is a pet peeve of mine, too. When I worked with publishers, especially with Harlequin, they would always ask for these very detailed descriptions of all the characters before they did the cover art. And then they'd send you the cover flat and you'd say, huh? I do remember I had written a book. I had visualized the hero as looking like, I think his name was Richard Dean Anderson. It was MacGyver, the original MacGyver, really kind of blonde guy.
Yeah.
And I specified this on the, and he was kind of a quirky, high-tech genius, too, so it made sense. And then they sent me the cover flat, and instead of MacGyver, I got Dobie Gillis. And I was just, oh, no. I hate it, too. Back when I worked with publishers, I had no real input into it at all. So, reader, believe me, I sympathize. One of the nice things about being an indie author is that I can veto a cover. I can ask for redesign. I can say this is what I want. These are the characters I want on that cover. So it is less likely to happen then. Sometimes you just can't get exactly what you want. But yeah, you read these books, you fall in love with these characters, you visualize them a certain way, and then there are these people on the cover who look nothing like them. I had written one book, which I have reissued in digital recently, called Going Back, in which the heroine was kind of funny looking. And that was one of the premises of the book. She just was not very pretty. And part of it is that the hero, as he falls in love with her, he realizes that he loves her anyway because he's gorgeous. And at the end of the book, I mean, it ends with they make their lifelong commitment to each other. And he says, but would you consider getting contact lenses because you really look dorky in the glasses? So it's not like she suddenly, not like the librarian who puts down her hair and takes off her glasses. And she's always going to be funny looking, but she's just a wonderful person, and he loves her. And of course, I got the cover, and there's this absolutely gorgeous woman on the cover, and I said,
Oh, no.
that's not how I pictured her, but what are you going to do?
I got one cover, and I said out loud as I looked at it, who are these dorks, and what did you do with my characters? He's a rancher, and they've got him in a suit, and, I just... This is one of the reasons most of my covers now don't have people on them. Because I can never find the right people. I could spend days looking at stock photos, and none of them are exactly who I have in my head. So I tend not to have people. I tend to have something that represents either landscape or something that represents something happening in the book, because that's a lot easier to get right. So that is a great question, reader.
But, the other thing I would say to the reader, or to everybody, is that when you read digitally, I mean, I do most of my reading on Kindle now. The cover is a good tool to capture your interest in the book, but once you start reading, you don't ever look at the cover again. So that sort of helps me when there's a cover that I don't think is right for the book, but then once I'm in my Kindle, I don't really have to look at the cover anymore.
That's a really good point. I tend to read digitally, but across multiple platforms, and audiobooks too. Whereas with a paperback book, you'll see the cover physically because it's sitting right there, and you'll see it multiple times, so it has more impact on you, I think, than that first sight that you get with a digital or an audiobook. So another reader question. Well, we sort of covered, where do your stories come from? And you talked about the characters setting up shop in your head. Okay, this is about where you work, your workspace. And it says, what is your favorite place to write? Why? Does it have an inspirational view? And I'm going to say, I'll tell you, reader, that her usual workspace does not have an inspirational view, and it's a mess.
I was waiting for that. Unfortunately, Pat has seen my office, and she can tell you all. The rest of my house is very neat. I'm very tidy.
True. True.
But my office is like a menagerie. It's just a zoo. I will say there is a window on the side of my desk, and it overlooks this small patch of woods in our backyard.
Oh, okay. I saw it at night.
You saw it at night, so you did not see that. But I have always had to have a window right near my desk so I can gaze out the window at something pretty. And I mean, when we bought this house, I got to choose which room was going to be my office before we doled out the bedrooms to the kids. I needed a room at the back of the house so I could look out at the woods rather than out at the street. But yeah, I do work at my desk most of the time. My desk is very cluttered. Among the clutter is not just folders of information, research materials, just all that kind of stuff, but I also have like a whole pile of stuffed animals. I have a bunch of, and they're all significant in various ways. I have a bunch of books, couple of toothosauruses, several dictionaries. My most important reference book I have, besides the Book of Poisons, is my 10,000 Names for Babies, because I'm always looking for good character names. And just a bunch of books like that, and again, piles of stuff. I have a couch in my office that has room for one person to sit on because the rest of it is piled with books. I have bookcases that are...
But wait a minute, time out, because if that one person sits on the couch, this is the voice of experience, that person is then covered by an avalanche of books.
Yes, because they all slide down towards you. I know. But I also find I can work when I have to. I take my netbook on my little laptop, and if I'm traveling, or when my kids were growing up, I used to take a laptop to their Little League games because they'd have to get to the field an hour before the game would start. I never missed watching the game, but during the hour warm-up and practice, I would just take my laptop and sit in the bleachers and get a lot of writing done. I did have to be careful because sometimes a kid would suddenly, I'd realize some kid was reading over my shoulder, and if this was a sex scene, that would not have gone over well. But, or the lounge outside their music teacher's studio, or when one of my sons is recovering from cancer right now, but I had gotten a lot of writing done in the waiting room when he was getting his chemo, and on planes.
And he's doing great.
He is doing really well. He is in remission. No signs of cancer in him right now, and we're very pleased. And I'll give a shout out to Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. They are miracle workers. So I do find sometimes that I get more writing done on my laptop because it doesn't have, I could access Facebook on it, but I don't. It's sort of more focused. It's not as comfortable a machine for me to go around playing, and I certainly can't play solitaire on it very easily. So I do write on that sometimes if need be. But I'm very comfortable in my office. It's my little hidey hole, and that's where I get most of my writing done. Amid the clutter. I keep thinking, how can I write with all this clutter? But somehow I think it works for me. I've reached the point now where I'm afraid if I cleaned the place up, I would never be able to write again. So that's my excuse anyway.
Yeah, it's so weird because, as Barbara says, the rest of her house is very neat and orderly. And having roomed with her, she's generally neat. And this room is
when you walked into the office, you said, "Oh my God."
And you were talking about little kids seeing what you were writing on your screen. Are you conscious of that on airplanes?
Fortunately, the seats usually have pretty high backs. If there's somebody sitting next to me, I'll kind of tilt my machine a little bit just to make sure they can't see what I'm writing. I don't.
It's the people diagonally behind you, because I look at people's screens. So I know people look at the screens, so I'm very conscious of it with mine.
That advice. I will bear that in mind.
Yep. So watch what you're writing on airplanes.
I will be very careful about that.
From when you first got published, have you changed the way you write? Has it changed your process, or?
Yes, it has a lot. I sold my first book in 1983, when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. When I first started writing, I was reading a lot of romances and trying very much to mimic, and not to copy, but to kind of capture that voice and capture that kind of language. I know I slipped a lot because my editor always would tell me, I was reading your book. Every time I read one of your manuscripts, I always have to look up at least one word. And that kind of irked her. But I have a big vocabulary, what can I say? But as I began to feel more confident about what I was doing, I began to color outside the lines a lot more. Now I think my writing my writing voice is a bit more streamlined. It's a bit more direct, and I feel much more comfortable that way. And in terms of the writing process, I used to get the best writing done in the morning. Now I get the best writing done in the afternoon. It's
You're coming to the dark side.
Yeah, no, it's because I'm out jogging in the morning and taking care of errands and things like that in the morning. There's something about, I usually have a real dip in energy in the early to mid-afternoon, and somehow that dip in energy, you'd think it would make it harder for me to write, but it sort of strips away any kind of inhibitions is not quite the word.
Internal editor?
Yeah, that's it really. And I just say, okay, I'm exhausted, I'm just going to spew it all out however it comes out, and I get a lot of writing done in a very short stretch of time, usually in a couple of hours. It's like I have to build up and build up and build up until about 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon, and then it all comes gushing out of me. And it seems like a very undisciplined way to work, except that it works, so I don't question it. I think that's one of the things I've learned over the years is if something is working, just go with it and don't say, I should be doing it this way or I should be doing it that way. Just do it the way it works.
Yeah. Accept it when it works.
Yeah, but yeah, be grateful. Fall on your knees and say, thank you, Muse.
Yes.
It's working.
I think that touching on that internal editor, I think that's, or internal critic, is something that a lot of people either don't recognize or they think they're the only one it happens to. I think a lot of us write with at least two voices going on at the same time in our heads. The voice of the story, of the characters, and we're writing that along. And then there's this, you shouldn't have done that. You should have done this better. That isn't very good. What are you doing here? Oh, no, you can't go. You're going down this track. That's not good. And then there can be another voice even saying, you should be spending your time on this other project. Why are you working on this project? There's this other project you should be doing. I probably have 5 voices going most of the time.
I know.
Now, if you tell me I'm the only one.
We're schizophrenic. Well, yeah, lots of voices. The 3 faces of Judith or the 3 faces of Patricia. Yeah, we have talked with some of our writer friends who use dictation software to write verbally, and I could never do that because I'm constantly editing as I write. I'll write a sentence and say, oh no, I have to change that word, and I can't move on to the next sentence until if I have a word that I've repeated several times in a paragraph, and I think, oh my gosh, I have to fix that paragraph before I can move on to the next paragraph. That's kind of the internal editor nagging me. Yeah, there are lots of voices, and then there are the character voices in there too, shouting, wait, it's my turn for a big scene,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, unless dictation picks up cut and paste and backspace delete, I don't think I will be able to use it because I'm going backwards at least as much as I'm going forward. You mentioned naming characters, and do you have thoughts about how you name your characters? Are you looking for specific things when you're coming up with a name? Do some of them come pre-named? Do they ever announce their name to you?
Some of them do, most of them don't. There are certain things I do look for in names. One really important one is if a book has a number of characters in it, I want their names to be different enough that there won't be confusion, unless confusion is an important part of the plot. I try, like in a romance, I will try to make sure my hero and heroine's names do not start with the same letter. I don't know why, I just sort of feel they need that contrast. Certain names fit certain personality types. So, yeah, if I have a certain kind of character, I can't name him something that's just not going to fit his type. And usually, I'll go through the book, through my 10,000 Names for Babies book, and as I'm thumbing through it, suddenly certain names will leap out at me, and I'll say, yeah, this name would fit him really well. I pay attention to the last names also. Because the last names will frequently tell us something about the character's ethnicity, and so I not all of my characters are WASPs. I like to have Italian characters, Jewish characters, Polish characters, Irish characters, and so their last names may be reflecting that. And then I want the first name and the last name to have a nice rhythm too, have a nice flow. When I first started out writing romances, I was always very conscious about whether the heroine's first name would go well with the hero's last name, because I knew they were going to get married at the end of the book. But nowadays lots of names anyway, and that is no longer a major concern for me. But you want the names to tell us something about the character. Sometimes a person's name really reflects the kind of person they are, or reflects something about their background, because I pay a lot of attention to my characters' backgrounds, their childhoods, what their parents were like, where they grew up. I had in the second book in the Magic Jukebox series, the hero, his family came over from Russia when he was a small child. That affected the kind of person he was, because he became a very rebellious American teenager who kind of troubled his parents. But it also reflected, a lot of names and things like that too. His name is Max, which is a good name for a Russian immigrant. Because you also, if your characters, if it's a romance hero, you want his name to be kind of sexy also. I won't insult people by naming some male names that are not very sexy, but we can.
You're going to get yourself in trouble,
I know.
Judith.
I know.
Have you found that since you first started published in 1982, you said?
83.
83. Okay. Have you
When I was
have the
5 years
names
old.
changed or can you go back and look at the names of characters in those early books and see that they were, oh, look at those 80s names or look at those early 90 names?
I've tried not to do too many trendy names, actually. The heroine and the hero and heroine of my first romance were named Kate and Russell. And I'm not sure where I came up with those names, except I liked them. But they're not particularly 80s names. Well, Kate was, I guess, a pretty common name at that point, or for babies. But, I've always had this sort of feeling when I would read certain romances and the hero's name was, Flint or something like that, and I would think, what were his parents smoking when they came up with that name? I don't know. I've tried to have kind of normal names, names that people can relate to. I had one hero named Cody. This is a fun book. It's called Married to the Man, but he was definitely a bad boy. Until I had the title down for that book, my working title for it was Every Writer Needs a Hero Named Cody. And so I had my...
It's a rather long title.
Yeah, well, it was what I had in my head. He was going to be my Cody. I was going to write my Cody book. Did you ever have a hero named Cody?
No, I don't.
Aha. Well, every writer needs to have one.
So I still got to write more books.
Yeah, you better write a Cody book soon. But for the most part, my characters have pretty ordinary names. I think another reason I like to give them sort of ordinary names is because I want them to be relatable to the reader. I want the reader to say, oh yeah, this is someone I could know. This is someone I could be. This is someone I could fall in love with. I choose names that convey that.
I have another reader question, and I love this one. If you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
Oh, that is a good question. Because collaboration is a tricky thing. And, there are writers who I absolutely admire and love, writers who have changed my life. I would say one writer...
Like who?
Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. That book changed. That was the book that made me decide, yeah, I want to write. I think, I was writing before I read that. I read it for the first time when I was 10, but it just knocked me sideways. That book just floored me. And it still floors me when I read it. But I would be so intimidated. The thought of collaborating with her, I would say, oh, I will be your secretary. You just dictate to me and I will write it down. I think it would be probably more fun to collaborate with someone, whose writing style is kind of different from me. I did once collaborate with a friend on a play, and we both thought the play, when we were done writing it, we thought it was absolutely brilliant, and I sent it to my then theater agent, who said, well, that was a fun project, now get back to work. I still think, and he was a very talented writer. He has written some children's or young adult fantasies, and at the time we worked on the play, he was a writer for Mad Magazine. He had a very quirky sense of humor, and we really had a good time writing the play. But collaboration is hard. I would love to write with E.B. White, who again gave us Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, another of my absolute favorite books when I was growing up. But then he also wrote all those grammar books, and he'd probably be smacking my hand and saying, "Don't split that infinitive." I really admire people who can collaborate. It's a difficult thing to do. You have to be able to assert yourself and not just subsume yourself in the other person's voice. But Pat, we could have fun collaborating. I bet we get along so well.
I bet we could have fun. Yeah.
All right. Some night when we're
it might be the end of a beautiful roommateship.
Some night when we're sharing a room at a conference, if we have a lot of wine on hand. And
Well, we do write occasionally at conferences, but we're usually sitting across the table from each other,
that's right, at the last
writing our own
conference.
stuff on our own computers. The
Exactly.
good thing about that is I look up and I'm ready to goof off or something. I look up and Judith is writing away, so I slink back to my keyboard and keep
Same
writing.
here, but that, again, at the last conference where we roomed together and we spent that last afternoon, and I kept looking
Yep.
over at you and saying, "Oh, she's still writing. I better get back to it." See, we're good for each other.
Mutual guilt.
Yes, yes.
So, okay. Yeah, you told us a little bit about your most recent book, but tell us some more. It's book 4 in your mystery series, which is called.
The Lainie Lovett Mysteries, and all of the books. Lainie Lovett she's a fourth grade teacher, widowed, middle aged. She has 2 nearly grown children. One has boomeranged back to the house after college, and the other is still in college. She loves her children. She loves her teaching. She loved her husband very much, and she loves this recreational soccer team that she plays on. And her closest friends are a couple of her teammates on the soccer team. All of the books have a certain soccer title, soccer thing. I mean, they all have the word kick in them. The first book is called Still Kicking. The second one is called Kickback. The third one's called Drop Kick. And the fourth one is Kick the Bucket. And they're very funny. And as one thing I learned, if you want to write funny mysteries, you always have to make sure that the victim is someone who's pretty despicable, because otherwise, if it's a beloved person, nobody's going to find the book funny. But if it's an obnoxious creep, everybody's kind of happy he's dead. And that's kind of the attitude I have. And again, Kick the Bucket is they're all set in a moderate-sized town in the Boston suburbs. If you saw my town, you probably would recognize some of the scenes. And I've changed the names, but our little favorite Mexican restaurant in our town is called El Camino in the series. And Lainie and her friends, after soccer practice, they always go to El Camino for margaritas. She just in the first mystery, she is kind of dragged into the mystery quite against her will and by accident. But now, once she solves that mystery, people sort of revere her as the person who can solve mysteries. And in the fourth book, in Kick the Bucket, one of her soccer friends brings her to visit the soccer friend's aunt, who lives in this senior residence, independent living residence, because there are a number of mysteries in the residence, and they all want that famous friend of yours who can solve mysteries, figure out why things are missing. And of course, given who the residents are, some of the things are missing because they've misplaced them, or because they're one in well, I don't want to ruin the book, but things like that. But and somebody dies, and as Lainie points out, well, people are old in this place, so I guess that's not surprising. But she begins to suspect there's something very suspicious about this death, and she just kind of gets sucked into it. So but they're a lot of fun, and there's a real kind of suburban feel to them. And although the third book in the series is set in and around Boston, has more city scenes, because you have to be careful. You don't want to get into what I call the Jessica Fletcher Cabot Cove situation, where everyone comes to this little town in Maine and dies, and so you do want to kind of open things up a little, so it doesn't so Rockford. The town is, I named the town Rockford because I used to love watching the Rockford Files. That is my homage to James Garner. You don't want people to think that Rockford is a town people go in to die. So I have had some of the murders, one of the murders is set outside Rockford, and actually in the second book, in Kickback, the murder victim lives a town away from Rockford, but she works in the school where Lainie teaches. Yeah, so in Kick the Bucket, it was fun to get her into this other community with these older people. I had a lot of fun writing about them. In order to have an excuse to keep coming back to the place, she offers to teach a class in memoir writing, and I have had a lot of fun having these people arguing about their memoirs and writing these paragraphs about 40-year-old and 60-year-old grievances and things. So it was a lot of fun to write, and I hope it's a lot of fun to read too.
So what do you have coming up next? What's the next release on the schedule? Do you have one?
Well, I don't have a release date yet. I've just started work on a new Magic Jukebox book. This book is called Rescue Me, after the Franklin song. Yeah. I love that song. One of the things when I'm writing the Magic Jukebox books is that I listen to the song, the theme song of the book, over and over. So I've been listening to a lot of Aretha Franklin singing Rescue Me. In it, the hero is a police officer in town who's trying to help the heroine who's being stalked by someone, but in a way he needs to be rescued from traumas in his past also. So they end up rescuing each other in a way. He's a police officer, and she's a kind of she's a yoga teacher who comes from a very flaky background, and so it's an opposites attract kind of book. But they end up rescuing each other, and because
I like mutual rescues.
Yes, yeah. I do too. So I'm just starting it now. I'm in the first chapter, but hopefully I will be able to write it quickly because my readers keep saying, when is the next Magic Jukebox book coming out? So got to get it done.
So where can readers find out about that book and the Lainie Lovett series and all your other books?
My website is www.juditharnold.com, and I have a Facebook page which I think is Judith Arnold Author, or they can follow me on BookBub. I have followers there too. All my books are available on Amazon and iBooks and all of the retailers, and I'm out there. And contact me through my website, and we'll talk.
And we will have the URLs in the show notes, where it's so much easier to just click and go find out more about Judith. And now we're going to do a little epilogue on this. These are rapid fire, hopefully fun questions.
This is the light.
No forewarning. And it's an either or.
Okay.
You have to pick one or the other. Okay, I'm going to start you off with dog or cat?
Dog.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Cowboy boots or hiking boots?
Hiking boots.
Cake or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Day or night?
Day.
Which is eerier to you, an owl hooting or coyotes howling?
Coyotes howling.
Cruise or backpacking?
Oh, gee. Cruise. I'm getting old. 40 years ago I would have said backpacking, but now I'm getting old, so okay, cruise.
Mountains or beach?
Beach.
Leggings or sweats?
Sweats.
Save the best for last or grab the best first?
Saving the best for last.
Okay, that will be our last question for today. Thank you so much, Judith Arnold. Really appreciated your coming on Authors Love Readers and having this conversation with me. And I don't think we've told any real secrets. We've been pretty good. I was a little concerned about that because when we get talking,
but we will keep them. That's why we're still friends. Although you did tell about my messy office. I don't know. You revealed my dirty secret about my office. But thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. Of course, I always love talking to you.
Yes, I love talking to you too. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye for now. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.